We resume our studies of Mark's Gospel at the point where Jesus' fate is finally reached. He is to be condemned to death as both a blasphemer and as a traitor, someone who is an enemy of both the state and of God himself. So please listen to these solemn words as I read them to you. Mark records in chapter 15 verses 1 to 20 this story. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "You've said so," Jesus replied. The chief priest accused him of many things. So again Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they're accusing you of." But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now it was the custom at the festival to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man named Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed Jesus over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him, and they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they'd mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. At the time that Jesus lived, Palestine was occupied by the Roman Empire. So a conviction made in a Jewish court required confirmation by the Romans. Hence the story retold in the present verses. Understandably, the conviction for blasphemy made in chapter 14 verses 53 to 65 would have had no weight in a Roman court. It would appear therefore that the charge of treason that Jesus claimed political authority was used to secure conviction. Once again, however, the story is recounted not so much to simply state the facts as to interpret them and help us to apply them to ourselves. This story is not only about Jesus, but it's also about us. It's our story too. And the striking thing throughout this whole narrative is the way Jesus was treated. We notice several things. No serious attempt was made to examine the truth about him. The flip side of this is that a variety of strategies were taken to evade the responsibility to think for oneself. And it's as we explore these things that we begin to recognize they reflect back on us and our world. Today, similar reactions are made to Jesus and are equally tragic and absurd. We note therefore that one response to Jesus' claim was mockery and violence. The soldiers merely viewed Jesus as a suitable vehicle upon which to express their ignorant inhumanity. Mockery and violence, by word and deed, likes to believe that might is right. Such is profoundly corrupting, dehumanizing, and ultimately makes it impossible to engage with the truth. But by definition it cannot alter the truth, but only seeks to suppress it. We observe too that another strategy is false and or distorted testimony. The problem with being faced with truth and reality is that there is no place to hide but in deceit. Jesus was not convicted because he was found guilty, but convicted because others could not face up to the truth that he spoke and sought to evade it. Again, lies do not alter the truth. They can only seek to evade it. But why was there such a reaction to Jesus? It appears that we can identify three different reasons in this story. First of all, we notice the way in which both leaders and people were enticed to follow the crowd. See, especially if you have a Bible, verses 13 to 15, and then again 16 to 20. The desire to be part of an in-group and the herd instinct it inspires is one we recognize in ourselves and our world, and those in power are always ready to exploit it. And this was true in the reaction to Jesus. Even the disciples showed, as we've already seen, that it was difficult to be different. Then there's envy. Pilate recognized in others the jealousies that he was familiar with in himself. Jealousy, rooted in pride, remains at the heart of many rejections of Jesus. We will not bow to a greater one than we consider ourselves to be. And finally, there is simple expediency, which we see in verse 15. The challenge to face up to Jesus and his claims is a tough one. It will require a new worldview and a radical change of life orientation. So it's expedient to stay with the status quo. Thus we can dig deeper. The various responses traced back through the motives we've noticed were, so it seems, prompted once again by rejection of Jesus' claim to sovereignty. Rather than follow him, we follow the crowd. Rather than bow before him, we cling to our threadbare dignity. Rather than face up to the need for radical action, we fall back on the familiar and the secure. Of course, there are intellectual challenges in the way of faith, and there is no attempt to minimize them here or anywhere else in Mark's Gospel. More often, however, even the intellectual questions are a mask to hide the personal and moral issues that the call to welcome Jesus entails. How is it with you? How is it with me?